So now we talk about National Socialism is socialism, but it's not fascism. So the Marxist revolution was never coming to the industrialized West. This is something most German socialists were in acceptance of by the time World War I rolled around, and definitely after. The German socialism, National Socialism, comes up via some very odd routes. First, we have to understand the Volks movement. And Volk is a German word for folk, the people. But it's more like the common people. And the Volk movement was a very strange thing. Uh, that could be an entire video on its own, but the general idea is it came from this idea of almost this prehistoric German peasant, a member of the Aryan race, um, and this mythical power that comes with him. And there's a lot of mythical Nordic elements worked in with it. Um, Norse gods, other things like that. And this is actually something that started before the formation of modern German states. There was kind of a crisis of German nationalism following the Napoleonic Wars, where you've had some, prior to Napoleon, there were some 350 minor German states in the area, which would be modern Germany. Uh, it was compacted down to maybe about 3 dozen or so in the aftermath, which caused Germans to start looking at the idea of maybe we're one German people rather than all these little German subsets. And this Volk movement would spread through intellectual circles where they were honestly talking about the idea that this Volk existed when the peasant was allowed to work the land in the proper way, and when he was in touch with his Aryan background, and when he was worshiping the Nordic gods, all would be well. And this idea would flow directly through the formation of essentially the Bismarckian German state, the Prussians, who would basically gobble up the last of the independent German states in the 1870s, would continue on through World War I and would become a predominant part of the background thought process uh, of the National Socialists. That's why you hear all this weird occult stuff that goes along with them. This comes out of that. So, Mr. Hitler started out as a member of the German Communist Party. This is something that communists really don't want you to know, but it's pretty much a known thing. He was seen in, he's pictured in marches with the communists, and there's little doubt that he was an actual member of the party. Now, some of the things to understand about uh, general communism is if you go back to Marx's writings, Marx was a virulent anti Semite. He linked capitalism to Jewishness. He believed the two were horribly intertwined. And there was, in his mind, you could separate Jewishness from capitalism, but it would be quite a process and would require violent revolution and civil war to do it. Now, the German socialists, with this idea of Volks being in the background, would eventually come to equate, they would agree with Marx saying, yes, capitalism and Jewishness are so intertwined that they really can't be separated. But they would make a further observation. They would note that Marx actually had his own Jewish background, and that a lot of the key Russian revolutionaries were also Jewish. Some of this was a little bit overstated because there was some propaganda being made by the White Russians during the Civil War. But this idea that communism was Jewish as well was picked up by the German National Socialists. So they looked at capitalism and Marxism as being wholly corrupted by Jewishness, and you could not separate them. So that's why they took a very strong stand against Marxism. They looked at it as being as equal a threat as capitalism was. So, where Germans very much distinguish themselves is National Socialism doesn't believe in class struggle. They believe in race struggle. They believe the classes are an artificial construct brought about by race, and that essentially the non-Aryans are creating these artificial class structures that are separating the German people from each other. So you don't need a struggle of classes like Marx did, nor is there any way to come up with a way of moderating the classes like the fascists do. You actually have to have racial war in order to break the class system by getting rid of the races that are causing the problem. And obviously, the key race to them would be Jews. Essentially, Aryan race theory looked at this group of Aryans at the top. And then they had a hierarchy of races running all the way down. One of the quotes from one of the key early National Socialists said that the Aryan spirit does exist in some form in the Negro, but not at all in the Jew. So the Jews were at the absolute bottom, but there were ways to be conciliatory towards the various races up and down the ladder if you needed to utilize them. Unlike Italy, a person in Germany, so an Italian born in Italy, regardless of whether he had darker skin or lighter skin, whether he was Jewish or not, he was an Italian and able to be part of the fascist party. Whereas in Germany, you could be born there, but if you had the wrong look, the wrong heritage, and definitely if you were a Jew, you were not a proper German, you were not an Aryan. Yet at the same time, there were people who were outside Germany proper who were considered Aryans. So this race concept is very different than the Italian national concept, and very different from the international Marxian look at essentially all workers being brothers across the world. The idea of purity of race and the Nordic look were completely rejected by Italian fascists. Fascists actually believed themselves to be a form of Mediterranean Aryan, but they did not believe Aryans could be of pure blood, whereas German National Socialists believe that you could have pure blood and must have your pure blood. In fact, they believe that's how nation states collapsed, is by having insufficient pure blood. So, one of the things that drive the National Socialists is the belief in the shrinking market theory. Now, if you listen to my last video, fascists believed in the shrinking market theory, and both fascists and National Socialists get this from socialist theory. The shrinking market theory is the idea that industrialized nations will eventually so industrialize themselves that they will be incapable of extracting raw materials and food in order to basically run the workforce in the factories that come from it. So, in their mindset, they want to conquer Ukraine and Caucasus for the food and oil, respectively. The thing that's very different between the National Socialists and the fascists is the National Socialists believe that they had to destroy the peoples that they were invading in order to occupy them with their own people, whereas the Italians believed in the idea of colonization, that they could actually uplift the people that they were working with to a certain extent. Okay. Instead of class conflict, there would be race conflict, and was only fixable by driving out or exterminating the non-Aryan races. Shrinking markets made it impossible to implement National Socialism until all the requisite resources were under control of the whole.